Elena Rodriguez had made a promise to herself 18 months ago, standing in the rain outside Walter Reed Medical Center, her uniform still smelling of antiseptic and failure. She would never try to save another living soul as long as she drew breath. The promise had been whispered through tears, her hands still shaking from the memorial service where they had honored Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, Corporal Aisha Williams, and Private First Class Tommy Nakamura. 3 names added to a wall. 3 lives she had fought desperately to save in the dust and heat of Kandahar province. 3 failures that still woke her screaming at 3 a.m. The discharge papers called it severe post-traumatic stress disorder with survivor's guilt. Elena called it justice. If she could not save the people who mattered most, the soldiers who had trusted her with their lives, then she had no right to pretend she could save anyone else. She sold everything that connected her to her old life, packed what remained into a duffel bag, and bought a one-way ticket to the most isolated place she could find on a map. A cabin 40 miles outside of Utqiagvik, Alaska, where the Arctic Circle cut through endless white wilderness and the nearest human being was a 3-hour snowmobile ride away. For 18 months, this worked. Elena woke before dawn, chopped wood until her muscles screamed, hunted caribou and ptarmigan for food, and went to bed exhausted enough that sometimes she slept through the night without dreaming of blood soaking into Afghan sand. She spoke to no one. She helped no one. She existed in a carefully constructed bubble where the only life she was responsible for was her own, and even that felt like more than she could handle most days. If you are watching this story, you are part of something special. Every subscription to Wandering Heart's Tales helps us share more incredible true stories about courage, redemption, and the unexpected bonds that save us when we have given up on saving ourselves. When you subscribe, you are not just watching, you are joining a community of people who believe that healing is possible, that second chances exist, and that sometimes the most broken souls find each other in the most impossible places. Please take a moment to subscribe and help us tell these stories that remind us why hope matters. The blizzard hit on a Tuesday in late March, though Elena had long stopped tracking days of the week. Time had become irrelevant in the Arctic, measured only by light and dark, warm and cold, alive and frozen. She had been checking her trapline 5 miles from the cabin when the wind shifted from a steady northern push to a violent, swirling chaos that reduced visibility to 3 feet. Whiteout conditions, fatal if you panicked, survivable if you stayed calm and followed protocol. Elena pulled her parka hood tight, activated the GPS beacon she always carried, and began the slow trek back to the cabin. She moved mechanically, 1 foot in front of the other, counting steps to stay focused. Combat had taught her that the mind was the first thing to fail in crisis, followed by fine motor skills, then gross motor function, then consciousness, then death. Keep the mind sharp, and everything else followed. She had covered maybe 2 miles when she heard the sound. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks, the howling creating phantom noises in the storm. But then it came again, cutting through the chaos with a clarity that made her stop dead in her tracks. A cry, high-pitched, desperate, weakening. Animal, definitely, but young, very young. Elena's first instinct was to keep walking. Not your problem, not your responsibility. Whatever it is will be dead in an hour anyway, and you will be dead too if you do not keep moving. But her feet would not cooperate. They had stopped, planted in the snow, and refused to take another step toward the cabin. The sound came again, and Elena felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been frozen solid since that day in Kandahar. She followed the cries off the trail into deeper snow, knowing this was insane and doing it anyway. 50 yards, 100. The GPS beacon blinked its steady reassurance that she could find her way back. The cries grew louder, more frantic. Elena pushed through a drift and nearly fell into a small depression sheltered by ice-covered rocks. The mother bear was dead. Elena knew this immediately from the stillness, the unnatural angle of the body, the way snow had already begun to claim it. A grizzly, massive, even in death, with a bullet wound in her shoulder that had bled out hours ago. Hunters, probably, who had tracked her and fired from distance, then lost her trail in the building storm. The bear had made it this far before collapsing, and beneath her, sheltered in the final moments by her own cooling body, were 3 cubs. They were tiny, no bigger than rabbits, their fur matted with snow and blood from their mother's wound. Their eyes were barely open, clouded with cold and exhaustion. One lay motionless, possibly already gone. The other 2 mewled weakly, their small mouths opening and closing in search of warmth and milk they would never receive. As Elena stared at them, the smallest one, the one that looked like it had maybe minutes left, lifted its head and looked directly at her with eyes that seemed far too aware for an animal that young. Leave them. The rational part of her brain was screaming, "They are already dead. You cannot save them. You cannot save anyone. This is not your mission." But Elena was already moving, was already pulling off her pack, was already lifting the cubs one by one and tucking them inside her parka against her body heat. The 2 that were still warm came first. She checked the 3rd, found the faintest heartbeat, and added it to the others against her chest. The hike back to the cabin took 90 minutes that felt like days. Elena moved through the storm with 3 bear cubs pressed against her ribs, feeling their tiny hearts beating, feeling them struggle and squirm and slowly warm up. She talked to them the way she used to talk to wounded soldiers during evacuations, keeping her voice calm and steady. "You are going to be okay. I have got you. Just hold on, just a little longer." The words felt like lies, but she said them anyway. When she finally reached the cabin, Elena kicked the door open and went straight to the wood stove. She built up the fire until the small space blazed with heat, then carefully pulled the cubs from her parka and laid them on a nest of blankets near the stove. In the light, she could see them clearly for the first time. Their fur was a strange color, not quite brown, not quite cream, somewhere in between. Their paws were enormous for their body size. Their faces had an elongated quality that seemed wrong for grizzly cubs, though Elena was no expert. She did not let herself think about whether this was legal or smart or even possible. She just moved, drawing on 18 months of medical training to assess and treat. All 3 were severely hypothermic. The smallest one, the one she had thought might already be dead, was barely responsive. Elena grabbed the medical supplies she had kept from her service, started an IV on herself to warm the fluid, then carefully introduced subcutaneous fluids into each cub to combat dehydration and hypothermia. She rigged heating pads from hot water bottles wrapped in towels. She monitored their temperatures with a field thermometer. She massaged their tiny bodies to stimulate circulation. For 6 hours straight, Elena worked with the focused intensity of a combat medic, because this was familiar, this was something she knew how to do, and if she stopped moving she would have to think about why she was doing it, and that question had no good answer. By midnight, all 3 cubs were breathing steadily. By 3 a.m. they were crying for food. Elena had no bear formula, obviously, so she improvised with powdered milk from her supplies, mixed with water and a tiny amount of honey for calories. She used an eyedropper at first, then graduated to a small bottle once they figured out how to suck. The 2 larger cubs took to it immediately. The smallest one, the fighter, took nearly an hour to consume an ounce. When dawn finally came, Elena collapsed into her chair and stared at 3 sleeping bear cubs piled on her blankets like they belonged there. She had broken her promise. She had intervened. She had saved something, and for the first time in 18 months, she had gone an entire night without thinking about Kandahar. The next weeks passed in a blur of feeding schedules, cleaning, and exhaustion. Elena fed the cubs every 3 hours around the clock. She cleaned up after them constantly. She monitored their health obsessively, checking temperatures and weight and responsiveness a dozen times a day. It was harder than combat medicine because these patients could not tell her what hurt or what they needed, could only cry and squirm and trust that she knew what she was doing. She named them on day 5, though she told herself the names did not matter, that she was only fostering them until spring, when she could contact wildlife services and arrange proper placement. The largest male, the one who pushed his siblings aside at feeding time and always claimed the warmest spot by the stove, became Atlas. The middle cub, endlessly curious, who explored every corner of the cabin and got into everything, became Nova. And the smallest, the one who had nearly died but refused to give up, who fought for every meal and every breath, became Echo. Echo was Elena's favorite, though she would never admit it out loud. There was something about the little cub's determination, the way she never let being smaller stop her from trying to keep up with her siblings, that resonated with something deep in Elena's chest. Echo reminded her of Tommy, the youngest member of her unit, barely 20 years old and determined to prove he belonged. Tommy had died in her arms, bleeding from wounds no medic could fix, and the last thing he had said was, "I am sorry I let you down." By week 8, the cubs had grown from rabbit-sized to small dog-sized. Their eyes had fully opened, revealing irises of a startling pale blue-green that seemed to shift color in different light. Their fur had thickened into dense coats that no longer looked quite brown or quite cream, but rather a strange silvery blonde color Elena had never seen on a bear before. Their paws were massive, far too large for their bodies, suggesting they would grow to enormous size. They played constantly, wrestling and tumbling, and making sounds that ranged from cute chirps to surprisingly deep growls. Atlas always won their play fights. Nova always found new ways to cause chaos, once managing to knock over an entire shelf of supplies. Echo always tried her hardest, never backing down, even when clearly outmatched. They slept in a pile, often with Elena sitting nearby, her hand resting on warm fur, feeling heartbeats that proved she could still save something. By month 3, Elena had stopped telling herself this was temporary. The cubs knew her as their mother. She knew them as her family, the word uncomfortable but undeniable. They followed her everywhere around the cabin. They cried when she went outside without them. When she let them out for brief supervised trips into the snow, they stayed within 20 feet of her at all times, constantly checking to make sure she was still there. The isolation Elena had craved for 18 months suddenly felt less necessary. She started thinking about the future for the first time since Kandahar. What would happen when Atlas, Nova, and Echo were full-grown bears? Could she handle 3 massive predators? Did she even want to? Or was this just another temporary mission that would end in loss? But there were things that bothered her, small things at first, easy to dismiss. The cubs' teeth seemed sharper than normal bear teeth, their canines elongated in a way that looked more wolf than grizzly. Their faces were narrower than she expected, their snouts more pointed. When they vocalized, the sounds had a quality that made her skin prickle, something between a growl and a howl that seemed wrong for bears. And their behavior, while playful, had an edge of wildness that never quite settled, no matter how much she socialized them. By month 5, Elena could no longer ignore the signs. These bears were different. Maybe they were just an unusual regional variant. Maybe their dead mother had been some kind of rare subspecies. But the doubt gnawed at her, and Elena had learned in combat that ignored doubts got people killed. There was only one person within 100 miles who might have answers. Miguel Santos ran a ranch 40 miles south, one of the few year-round operations in the region. Elena had met him exactly once when she first arrived, and he had respected her need for isolation without question. But Miguel also had connections to wildlife services, knew every animal in the Arctic, and could probably tell her whether she should be worried about 3 bear cubs with weird teeth and strange coloration. Elena loaded Atlas, Nova, and Echo into the sled attached to her snowmobile, noting how they had to squeeze to fit now, their bodies dense with muscle despite their young age. The ride to Miguel's ranch took 2 hours through terrain that was finally thawing from winter's grip. The cubs enjoyed it immensely, their heads poking out of the sled, tongues lolling in expressions that looked like joy. Miguel met her at his barn, his weathered face breaking into a smile that died the moment he saw what was in her sled. He stared at the 3 cubs, now wrestling in the snow, and his expression shifted from friendly to deeply concerned in the space of a heartbeat. "Elena," he said carefully, "where did you find these animals?" "In a blizzard 5 months ago," Elena replied. "Their mother was dead. I couldn't leave them." Miguel walked closer to the cubs, watching how they moved, how they interacted with each other and with Elena. Atlas approached him boldly. Nova sniffed his boots with interest. Echo stayed back, protective of Elena, a low rumble in her small chest. "You have been raising them for 5 months," Miguel said, and it was not a question. "Yes, Elena." Miguel turned to face her fully. "These are not normal grizzly cubs." The words hung in the cold air between them. Elena felt her chest tighten, the old familiar feeling of dread that preceded every disaster. "What do you mean?" "Look at their coloration. Look at their facial structure. Look at the way they move." Miguel gestured at the cubs. "Grizzly bears do not look like this. Not in Alaska. Not anywhere." "Then what are they?" Miguel pulled out his phone, scrolled through images, then held it out to her. The screen showed a photograph of a large bear with pale cream-colored fur, somewhere between polar bear and grizzly. The caption read, "Grolar bear, grizzly-polar bear hybrid. Confirmed sighting voor Banks Island 2000 Woesen." Elena stared at the image, then at her cubs, then back at the image. The resemblance was undeniable. "Grolar bears," Miguel said quietly, "also called Paisley bears, hybrid offspring of grizzly and polar bear parents. They are appearing more frequently as climate change pushes polar bears south and grizzlies north. There have been maybe 6 confirmed sightings in the wild, ever. They are rarer than almost any animal on Earth. And Elena, they are protected under every wildlife law that exists." The world tilted sideways. Elena sat down hard in the snow, feeling Atlas immediately press against her side, sensing her distress. Protected, meaning illegal to possess. Without permits and proper facilities. Yes, extremely illegal. Federal offense level, illegal. Miguel's voice was gentle but firm. These animals should not exist outside of a research facility or a specialized sanctuary. The fact that you have raised 3 of them successfully in your cabin is unprecedented. It is also going to be a massive problem the moment anyone in authority finds out. "I did not know," Elena heard herself say, the words barely above a whisper. "I thought they were just bear cubs. I was just trying to save them." "I believe you. But Elena, we need to get them to a specialist, someone who can verify what they are and advise on next steps. I know a wildlife geneticist in Fairbanks, Dr. Sarah Chen. She is good people, discreet. She can help us figure this out." Dr. Chen arrived 3 days later with a mobile lab in the back of her truck and an expression of intense scientific curiosity barely contained beneath professional calm. She examined Atlas, Nova, and Echo with meticulous care, taking measurements, photographs, hair samples, and blood draws, while Elena watched with growing dread. The cubs tolerated it surprisingly well, perhaps because Elena sat with them the entire time, murmuring reassurance, keeping them calm. Echo, predictably, was the most resistant, growling at Dr. Chen every time she got too close until Elena picked up the small bear and held her like a child. When the examination was done, Dr. Chen set up her laptop in Miguel's kitchen and ran genetic analysis while Elena, Miguel, and 3 hybrid bears waited. The silence stretched for 90 minutes before Dr. Chen finally spoke. "Confirmed," she said, turning the laptop to show genetic markers highlighted in red. "Grizzly polar bear hybrids, female grizzly mother, male polar bear father, based on mitochondrial DNA. This is only the 7th confirmed case of grolar bears in existence, and the first confirmed case of triplets." She looked at Elena with something between awe and concern. "Do you understand how extraordinary this is, how scientifically valuable? I understand that I raised them for 5 months, and now you are going to tell me I have to give them up," Elena said, her voice flat. Dr. Chen's expression softened. "Elena, these animals are protected under the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and about 6 other federal statutes. Possessing them without proper permits is a federal crime. I am legally required to report this to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service." They will send agents to assess the situation and arrange transport to an appropriate facility where they can be studied and cared for properly. They are already being cared for properly, Elena said, and heard the edge of desperation creeping into her voice. They are healthy, they are thriving, they trust me, I am their mother. I know, doctor, Chen said gently, and what you have accomplished is remarkable. But these are wild animals, Elena. Hybrid predators that will grow to potentially 800 pounds each. They need space. They need resources. They need specialists who understand their unique biology. What you have done kept them alive. But what comes next requires infrastructure you do not have. Miguel put a hand on Elena's shoulder. Elena shook it off. How long do I have? I will make the call today. Agents will likely arrive within 48 to 72 hours. Dr. Chen paused. Elena, I will advocate for keeping them together if possible. I will emphasize the bond you have built. But I cannot promise anything. The decision will be up to the Fish and Wildlife Service and whichever sanctuary has space and facilities for hybrid bears. After Dr. Chen left, Elena sat on Miguel's porch with 3 bear cubs sprawled around her, their combined weight now exceeding her own. Atlas had his massive head in her lap. Nova was investigating Miguel's truck with the curiosity that defined her. Echo pressed against Elena's side, her pale eyes watching the tree line as if sensing the danger approached. I cannot lose them, Elena said to Miguel. I know that sounds crazy. I know they are just animals, but they are the first thing I have cared about since Kandahar. They are the first thing that made me want to wake up in the morning. They are my family. Miguel was quiet for a long time. Then, what happened in Kandahar? Elena had never told the story out loud. Not to the therapists at Walter Reed, not to the discharge board, not to anyone. But sitting there with 3 impossible creatures who should not exist, who should have died in that blizzard but lived because she could not keep walking, the words came out. She told him about the patrol. The IED. The chaos and dust and screaming. Marcus with half his leg gone. Aisha with shrapnel through her abdomen. Tommy with wounds to his chest that pumped blood faster than Elena could stop it. She told him about working on all 3 simultaneously, her hands covered in their blood, screaming for medevac that was delayed by enemy fire. She told him about the moment she realized she was losing them, that all her training and experience and desperate effort was not enough. She told him about Tommy's last words, about holding Marcus, as he coded, about Aisha dying before the helicopter even landed. I was their medic, Elena finished, her voice raw. They trusted me to keep them alive, and I failed. All 3 of them died because I was not good enough, not fast enough, not skilled enough to save them. So I promised myself I would never fail anyone like that again, which meant never trying to save anyone again. Miguel absorbed this in silence. Then, but you saved these 3. Eleanor looked down at Atlas, at Nova, at Echo. I did not save them. I just delayed their death. In 2 days they will take them away, put them in cages, separate them maybe, and I will have failed them too. Or, Miguel said quietly, you gave them 5 months of life they would not have had. 5 months of love and safety and family. That is not failure, Elena. That is grace. The agents from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service arrived exactly 48 hours later. Agent David Morrison was in his 40s, by the book to his core, with the kind of rigid posture that screamed federal authority. His partner, Agent Lisa Okalik, was younger, Inupiaq, her expression carefully neutral as they stood in Elena's cabin and stared at 3 bear cubs who had grown too large for the space. Mrs. Rodriguez, Morrison began, and Elena cut him off. Miss, I am not married. Miss Rodriguez, we are here regarding the grolar bears in your possession. Dr. Chen filed the required report 3 days ago. We need to examine the animals and arrange transport to the North American Bear Center in Minnesota, where they have facilities equipped to handle hybrid species. Minnesota, Elena repeated, the word tasting like ash. You are going to take them from Alaska, from the only home they have known, and ship them across the continent to be research specimens. They will be well cared for, Agent Okalik said, her voice softer than Morrison's. The Bear Center is an excellent facility. They will have proper nutrition, veterinary care, enrichment activities, and cages, Elena interrupted. They will have cages. They will be separated from each other. They will never run free in the snow again. They will spend the rest of their lives behind bars so scientists can study them. These animals are critical to understanding climate change impacts on Arctic species, Morrison said firmly. Their genetic makeup could provide insights into hybrid adaptation, species survival, and conservation strategies. Their scientific value is immeasurable, and Ms. Rodriguez, regardless of your feelings, you are in violation of multiple federal statutes. We could arrest you right now. We are choosing not to do that because you clearly acted out of compassion and ignorance, not malice. But the bears must be surrendered immediately. Atlas, sensing the tension, moved to position himself between Elena and the agents. Nova's ears flattened. Echo, always the bravest despite her small size, actually growled, a sound that would have been cute if not for the very real teeth behind it. Agent Okalik held up her hands in a placating gesture. Please ask them to stand down. We do not want anyone to get hurt. They are not aggressive, Elena said, but placed her hand on Atlas's head, a calming gesture. They are protective. There is a difference. Morrison was unmoved. Miss Rodriguez, we need to sedate the bears for transport. It is safer for them and for everyone involved. Please step aside and let us do our job. Every muscle in Elena's body screamed to fight, to refuse, to barricade herself and the bears in the cabin and dare them to take her family by force. But she had been a soldier long enough to know that was not a fight she could win. The government always won in the end, always. Can I have one more day? The question came out smaller than she intended. Just one day. Please. They have been with me for 5 months. Let me say goodbye properly. Morrison started to refuse, but Agent Okalik touched his arm. Something passed between them, a silent conversation. Finally, Morrison nodded stiffly. 24 hours. Tomorrow at 0900, we return with a transport vehicle. Have them ready. Any sign that they are a danger to anyone, any reports of problems, and we come back immediately with a full team. Understood? Understood. After the agents left, Elena sat on the floor with 3 hybrid bears and cried harder than she had since Walter Reed. She had tried so hard not to care, not to attach, not to let herself love something that could be taken away. And it had not mattered. She loved them anyway. Atlas with his confidence and strength. Nova with her endless curiosity and mischief. Echo with her determination and fierce loyalty. They were hers and she was theirs, and in 24 hours that would end. She spent the day hiking with them through the thawing tundra, watching them play and explore and exist in the wildness that was their birthright. She cooked them a feast of fish and caribou meat. She sat with them as they ate, memorizing every detail. The way Atlas always ate first, then let his sisters have access to the food. The way Nova investigated every bite before consuming it. The way Echo, despite being the smallest, always claimed the best pieces and defended them fiercely. That night, as they slept in their usual pile with Elena sitting nearby, her hand resting on warm fur, she made a new promise. Not to never save anything again, but to fight for what she saved. To not let bureaucracy and regulations destroy a family that should never have existed but did. She did not know how yet, but she would find a way. At 3 a.m., Echo woke screaming. Elena was on her feet instantly, combat reflexes overriding exhaustion. The small bear was convulsing, her body rigid, foam at her mouth. Atlas and Nova had backed away, whining in distress, their eyes wide with fear. Echo! Elena dropped to her knees, hands moving to assess. Rapid heartbeat, labored breathing, body temperature spiking. Seizure, poisoning, brain bleed. Without proper diagnostic equipment, Elena could not be sure, but she knew with absolute certainty that Echo was dying. The nearest emergency veterinary clinic was in Fairbanks, 4 hours away. By the time she got Echo there, it would be too late. And even if they made it in time, would the vet treat a federally protected hybrid bear? Would they call the authorities immediately? Would Echo die in a cage while lawyers argued jurisdiction? Elena looked at the supplies she still kept from her military service. Basic medications, IV equipment, emergency surgical tools she had saved because throwing them away felt like abandoning the last piece of her identity as a medic. She had told herself she would never use them again. That promise had lasted 5 months before she broke it to save 3 dying bear cubs in a blizzard. Now she would break it again. Elena worked with the focused intensity born from years of emergency medicine under fire. She established an IV line, administered fluids and anti-seizure medication, monitored vitals continuously. Echo's body temperature was dangerously high, suggesting either severe infection or acute poisoning. Elena mentally reviewed everything Echo had eaten in the past 72 hours, and remembered the old bone Nova had found on their hike 3 days ago, the elk carcass left by hunters. Elena had taken it away, but not before Echo had gnawed on it for several minutes. Bone fragment obstruction. It had to be. The symptoms matched. And if she was right, Echo needed surgery immediately, or she would die from sepsis within hours. The rational part of Elena's brain screamed that this was insane. She was not a veterinarian. She had not performed surgery since Kandahar. She had no anesthesiologist, no monitoring equipment, no backup if something went wrong. If Echo died on her kitchen table, it would be Elena's fault. Another life lost under her care, another failure she would carry forever. But if she did nothing, Echo would definitely die. And unlike Kandahar, where Elena had been powerless to save her soldiers from wounds beyond any medic's ability to fix, this time she had knowledge and skills and tools that might make a difference. Elena looked at Atlas and Nova, at 2 bears who trusted her to save their sister, at 3 animals who had taught her that sometimes you have to try even when failure seems certain. That love means fighting even when the odds are impossible. She cleared the kitchen table, laid out her surgical supplies, and began to prep Echo for emergency surgery. If this was her last chance to save one of them, she would take it. If this was her redemption or her damnation, she would face it. If this was the moment that defined who she was, she chose to be someone who fought. At 4 a.m. in a cabin north of the Arctic Circle, a former combat medic who had sworn never to heal again cut into the body of a hybrid bear she loved like a daughter, searching for the thing that was killing her, praying to any force that might be listening that her hands would remember what her heart had never forgotten. The bone fragment was lodged in Echo's small intestine, 3 inches of jagged elk bone that had perforated the intestinal wall and caused the beginnings of sepsis. Elena's hands, steadier than they had any right to be, worked with precision she thought she had lost in Kandahar. Every motion was deliberate, every decision calculated. She was no longer Elena Rodriguez, the isolated hermit. She was Sergeant Rodriguez, Marine Corps medic, saving lives against impossible odds. 2 hours into the surgery, Elena extracted the fragment and assessed the damage. The intestine was inflamed and perforated, but she had caught it in time, barely. She repaired the perforation with careful sutures, irrigated the abdominal cavity, administered broad-spectrum antibiotics directly into the tissue, and began the painstaking process of closing. Atlas and Nova never left their vigil. They sat at the edge of the kitchen, 3 feet away, their pale eyes tracking every movement Elena made. They did not growl or interfere. They simply watched with an intensity that felt almost human, as if they understood that their sister's life hung in the balance and that Elena was the only one who could tip the scales. When Elena finally tied off the last suture and stepped back, her hands shaking with exhaustion, the 2 larger bears approached the table. They sniffed Echo carefully, their noses detecting something Elena could only hope was the scent of healing rather than dying. Atlas laid his massive head gently beside his sister. Nova licked Echo's face with infinite tenderness. "She is going to be okay," Elena told them, praying it was true. The knock came at exactly 9 a.m. Elena opened the door to find Agent Morrison and Agent Okalik standing on her porch, a large transport vehicle idling behind them. "We are here for the bears, Miss Rodriguez," Morrison said formally. "Please bring them out so we can sedate them for safe transport." "No," Elena's voice was steady despite the exhaustion and fear coursing through her. Morrison's expression hardened. "Excuse me? One of them had emergency surgery last night. Intestinal obstruction. She is in no condition to be moved. She needs at least a week of recovery and monitoring before she can handle the stress of transport." Agent O'Cullich's eyes widened. "You performed surgery on a federally protected animal? I saved her life. Echo would have died from sepsis within hours. I did what any medic would do when facing a life-threatening emergency with no other options available." Morrison's face had gone red. "Miss Rodriguez, you are not licensed to perform veterinary procedures, especially not on protected wildlife. This complicates the situation significantly. We need to see the animal immediately." Elena stepped aside. The agents entered and stopped cold at the sight of Echo lying on blankets near the wood stove, her abdomen neatly sutured. Atlas and Nova arranged protectively around her. The small bear lifted her head weakly at the stranger's arrival and made a soft sound that was somehow both vulnerable and defiant. Agent O'Cullich knelt at a careful distance, her trained eye assessing the surgical work. "The suturing looks professional," she admitted quietly. "Clean incisions, proper technique. You said intestinal obstruction. Bone fragment, 3 inches, perforated the intestinal wall. I removed it, repaired the damage, administered antibiotics. She should make a full recovery with proper post-operative care. But separating her from her siblings right now would cause psychological trauma that could compromise her physical healing." Morrison and O'Cullich stepped away to confer in low voices. Elena watched Morrison's rigid gestures, O'Cullich's more measured responses, and felt the weight of the decision being made. Finally, they returned. "This is an unprecedented situation," Morrison said stiffly. "These animals are federally protected. They cannot remain here. But transporting a post-surgical bear is inadvisable at best, dangerous at worst. We need to consult with our supervisor and with the Bear Center about appropriate protocols." "While you consult, they stay with me," Elena said firmly. "Echo needs round-the-clock monitoring. She needs familiar surroundings and her family's presence. Any wildlife biologist will confirm that pack separation during recovery creates stress that inhibits healing." Agent O'Cullich nodded slowly. "She is right, David. We should wait until the bear is stable." Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, but professional obligation won. 1 week. "We return in 7 days for transport. And Miss Rodriguez, there will be an investigation into your unauthorized veterinary practice on protected wildlife. Saving the bear's life does not excuse multiple federal violations." After they left, Elena sank to the floor beside Echo. The small bear nuzzled her hand weakly, and Elena felt tears she had thought were all cried out stream down her face. 1 week. She had bought 1 week before her family was torn apart. Echo healed with remarkable speed over the next 6 days. By day 2, she was attempting to stand. By day 4, she was trying to play despite Elena's strict orders to rest. The sutures held perfectly. No infection developed. It was everything Elena had hoped for, and somehow the worst outcome possible, because it meant Echo was healthy enough to be taken away. On day 5, Miguel arrived with unexpected news. "The tribal council wants to meet with you," he said without preamble. "The Inupiat elders, they heard about what happened. They want to talk before the agents come back." The tribal council met in a building that was part traditional, part modern, overlooking the Beaufort Sea. 5 elders sat in a semicircle, their weathered faces carrying generations of wisdom about surviving in the Arctic. Elena stood before them with 3 hybrid bears at her side, because she had learned they went everywhere together now. The eldest elder, a woman named Chinu, who looked to be in her 80s, spoke first in Inupiaq, then English. "These bears, they are Nanook and a quack together, polar bear and grizzly. The old stories tell of such animals when the world changes and boundaries blur. They are sacred, symbols of adaptation, of survival when everything is different. I did not know what they were when I found them," Elena said. "I just could not leave them to die." "We know your story," Chinu continued. "The soldier who came north to disappear, who lost her people and thought she lost herself, Who saved these impossible animals and found a reason to live again? She paused, her ancient eyes sharp. The government wants to take them away, put them in cages far from their home. We say no. Elena felt her breath catch. How can you stop them? Tribal sovereignty, another elder explained. These bears were born on traditional Inupiat lands. They are part of our territory, our heritage. We can claim guardianship under tribal law. The federal government cannot overrule that. Without lengthy legal battles, they likely will not win. But they are federally protected, Elena said, afraid to hope. They are also culturally significant to our people, Chinu said, and you have demonstrated the ability to care for them properly. If the tribe designates you as an authorized guardian with our supervision and support, the bears can stay in Alaska, where they belong. With the woman who saved them, Elena looked down at Atlas, Nova, and Echo, at three bears who should never have existed but did, at the family she had built without meaning to, from the broken pieces of her own heart. What do I have to do? The legal battle that followed was complex and exhausting and ultimately successful. The Inupiat Tribal Council invoked sovereign authority over wildlife born on tribal lands. They designated Elena as a special guardian with oversight from tribal elders and wildlife experts. Dr. Chen provided testimony about the scientific value of studying the bears in their natural environment rather than captivity. Miguel offered his ranch as expanded territory for when the bears outgrew the cabin. Agent Okalik, it turned out, had family in the tribe and quietly advocated for the arrangement behind the scenes. Agent Morrison fought it initially, but the legal precedent was clear. Tribal sovereignty trumped federal wildlife regulations in cases of cultural significance. After 3 months of negotiations, permits, inspections, and endless paperwork, the decision was finalized. Atlas, Nova, and Echo could stay with Elena under strict monitoring and guidelines. The day the final approval came through, Elena sat on her cabin porch with 3 hybrid bears sprawled around her, now grown so large she could barely fit them all in the space. Atlas had become a massive male, easily 500 pounds of muscle and power. Nova was sleek and intelligent, constantly exploring and investigating. Echo, still the smallest but no less fierce, pressed against Elena's side with absolute devotion. "We made it," Elena whispered to them. "We actually made it." She thought about the promise she had made 18 months ago, standing in the rain outside Walter Reed, never to save another living soul. She had broken that promise on a frozen night in a blizzard, and that decision had saved 4 lives. 3 bears who should have died in the cold, and 1 soldier who had been dying slowly in isolation. Elena thought about Marcus, Aisha, and Tommy, about wounds she could not fix and deaths she could not prevent. She would carry that grief forever, but she had learned that failure in the past did not mean failure in the future, that sometimes you saved what you could, and sometimes that was enough. That love did not erase pain, but made it bearable. That family was not always blood, but always choice. That the most broken souls could heal each other if they were brave enough to try. As the sun set over the Arctic tundra, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, a former Marine Corps medic and 3 impossible bears sat together in the profound silence of belonging. They were a family that should never have existed, a bond that defied every law of nature and government, but they were here, alive, together. And sometimes, against all odds and logic and reason, that was everything.